Okay, I'm showing 7 o'clock. We'll get ready to go. This is Bob Battle, an Extension Field Crops agent based over in the sugar beet country, and today is our talk on Cercospora leaf spot and sugar beets, and our host is Daniel Bublitz. Daniel, are you ready to go?
Yep, I'm ready. Good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Bublitz. I'm the sugar beet extension specialist here at Michigan State University, and today I'm going to talk about Cercospora leaf spot of sugar beets. So here in Michigan, we're very fortunate to have about 5 different species of leaf spot diseases that can infect sugar beets. And of those, the most severe is Cercospora leaf spot. This is caused by the foliar pathogen Cercospora peticola, and this pathogen is found in most places where sugar beets are grown, but it has the greatest impact in regions that have warm, wet summers. And so, since we do have several different leaf spot diseases here in Michigan, it's important to be able to distinguish them from each other, because they each have a unique biology, life cycle, and slightly different management strategy. And so a typical Cercospora lesion is circular unless it's stopped by a leaf vein, and they're generally fairly small lesions, from 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch in diameter. They often have a tan or gray center, then with a darker red or brown border. As you can see in the pictures I have on the screen here, the top one has a very nice deep red border, and the bottom one has kind of a darker brown color. The 2 most important features for identifying Cercospora, though, are the little black dots that you see in the center of the top lesion, which are called pseudostromata, then also the silver needle-like conidia that it can produce, which you can see that in the bottom picture. And the reason that those are the 2 most important features for identification are because Cercospora is the only one of our leaf spot diseases that will make those. So if you see them, you know for sure that you have Cercospora. So in a growing season, it's possible for a leaf to be infected by multiple individual lesions. So when you get between 400 to 1,000 of those lesions, you can have leaf death. And if you have a severe enough epidemic, it's possible for entire plants and even whole fields to become completely defoliated. So as you can imagine, this causes a significant decrease in the photosynthetic area of the plant, and will also eventually cause regrowth, which again further depletes the sugar reserves that the beet has. And so this disease in a bad enough epidemic can cause a nice healthy field like the one that I have up on the screen to look like this, with pretty much complete defoliation and complete burn down within only a few weeks even. So as you can imagine, this can have quite an impact on yield, and actually up to 40%, or losses of up to 40% are possible due to the disease. So these losses are manifested in the form of a decrease in the total size of the beet roots, as well as a decrease in the sugar concentration of those roots. Then we can also have an increase in impurities and in storage losses because of the disease. So now I want to take a brief moment and talk about the life cycle of Cercospora peticola, because I feel that if we're going to properly manage the disease, it's important to understand how the life cycle works. And so every year, the life cycle of Cercospora peticola begins with the fungus overwintering as pseudostromata in infected leaf tissue. And so the source of that leaf tissue can be either beet leaves from the previous year that were infected, or leaves of a weedy host such as lamb's quarter, pigweed, or mallow. So in the late spring and early summer, those overwintered pseudostromata will produce new spores or conidia, and those conidia will be moved by some sort of an outside force, such as rain splashing, wind, or an insect, to a new leaf that can be infected. Once that conidia lands on a new leaf, if the conditions are right, so if you have warm, humid conditions, the conidia will germinate and hyphae will begin to grow across the leaf surface. It will grow until it finds a natural opening in the leaf through which it can infect, and the hyphae will begin to grow internally inside the sugar beet. And it'll grow asymptomatically like that for about 10 to 14 days, at which point you'll see a new Cercospora lesion form. Within that lesion, you'll see new pseudostromata that are formed, and then from those pseudostromata, the fungus will make more conidia, which can then infect more leaf tissue, and the disease will continue to cycle like this throughout the season. So then at the end of the season, those infected leaves will be left in the field and serve as inoculum for the next season. So a couple of times throughout that life cycle, I mentioned the importance of weather. And so one of the areas where weather is the most important is during conidia dispersal. So as I said, you need some sort of an outside force to move those conidia from the pseudostromata to a new leaf. And that can be either rain, wind, or even things like insects or implements moving through the field. So then also at this stage, cloud cover can actually serve to help to increase disease, because the spores are actually quite UV sensitive, and so cloud cover can help protect those spores from sunlight. So then probably the area where weather is the most important in the life cycle is for infection. The ideal conditions for infection are warm and wet weather. So for a temperature, an ideal range is from about 65 to 89 degrees Fahrenheit, but it can occur at a broader range than that, all the way from 55 to 95 degrees. Then moisture is also very important to infection. You need a relative humidity of 90% and above, or free moisture on the leaf surface for several hours to encourage Candida germination and then infection. So in order to manage Cercospora leaf spot, there are three primary strategies that we can use. And the first of these are cultural practices. And these are just general things that you can do on your farm to help decrease the chances of getting Cercospora. And so some of these include having a minimum of a 3-year crop rotation between your sugar beet crops. Then also trying to avoid planting next to old beet fields, because those old beet fields can serve as a major source of inoculum. So if you can avoid being next to those, that can greatly decrease your chances of having Cercospora. However, because of how crop rotation happens for each field, sometimes you can't avoid planting next to an old beet field. And so when that happens, just keep in mind that the field will serve as a source of inoculum. And so you should be sure to scout along the edge, because that's probably where it's going to start in your field. Then also, another practice that can help to decrease the amount of Cercospora that you have is having good weed control in the field and around the field that you're going to have beets the year before the beets are planted. Because as I mentioned, those several weed species can serve as alternative hosts for Cercospora. So by decreasing the weed pressure that you have, you can also possibly decrease the inoculum that you come into the season with. So then there are also some other strategies that you can use to decrease the amount of inoculum that you have. These are doing things such as deep plowing to bury the old leaf debris, and also removing the leaves. Now these practices can be rather difficult and aren't commonly used for sugar beets here, but if we could use them, that would greatly decrease the amount of inoculum that we have. So the second primary strategy for managing Cercospora leaf spot is the use of host resistance. Now when it comes to Cercospora in sugar beets, having resistance can be a rather difficult trait to breed for, because Cercospora resistance is controlled by several genes within the sugar beet. And historically, resistance to Cercospora has come at a fairly high yield cost. So that is to say that generally, sugar beets that are more resistant to Cercospora are lower yielding than susceptible varieties. And it's important to mention here that there are no varieties that are completely immune to Cercospora leaf spot, but there is very good resistance that is available. And in fact, just recently, KWS made a major discovery in finding a new source of Cercospora resistance, and they're hoping to make that available here in commercial varieties for the coming growing season. So up on the screen, I actually have a picture of a variety that has that new source of Cercospora resistance. This picture was taken in the Michigan Sugar Cercospora nursery. You can see that even under that very high inoculum pressure, there's still very few lesions that formed on this variety as compared to its neighbors. So this is probably one of the biggest advances that we've had in quite a while for Cercospora management. So hopefully it's as good as what we think it will be going forward. So then the third management strategy for Cercospora leaf spot is the application of fungicide. Thankfully here in Michigan, we do have several different fungicides that we can use for this disease, and they can be broken into two broad categories, including contact and systemic fungicides. So for contact fungicides, we have things such as coppers, tins, and EBDCs. Then for the systemics, we have trizoles, strobilurins, benzimidazoles, and mixtures of those active ingredients. One thing to keep in mind is that even though these fungicides have been very effective in the past, and for the most part still remain very effective for Cercospora management, there's a fair amount of fungicide resistance here in Michigan to some of these chemistries, particularly to the strobilurins and the benzimidazoles, but also to the trizoles and tins. So going forward, if we want to increase the longevity of these fungicides, it's important to have good fungicide resistance management. And so the way that we do that is by always tank mixing systemic fungicides with either an EBDC or copper, and always using the full rates of these fungicides, and also rotating the chemistries. So that means doing things such as never applying systemic fungicides in the same class back to back, and not using either topsin or the same trizol product multiple times per season. So for example, in the case of the trizol products, you could use both Inspire and Proline in the same season, but you wouldn't want to use two applications of Inspire if you could help it. So then one of the most important things when applying your Cercospora leaf spot fungicides is to have good application timings. And so when you're thinking about when you want to apply the fungicides, keep in mind that the products that we currently have help to prevent the infection from occurring, but once the infection's occurred, they really don't do very much for the disease. When applying your fungicides, it's better to be a little bit earlier than later. So if you're planning on applying a fungicide, let's say on Friday, but there's predicted to be a rainstorm that day, it's better to apply it either the Wednesday or Thursday before rather than waiting until it's Saturday or Sunday after you were scheduled to apply. And so as far as when you should apply the first application this season, we recommend that you apply at 35 DSVs, which is going to be probably sometime this upcoming week. So around June 25th is, if you want to go by an actual date. So the subsequent applications from that point on should occur 10 to 14 days after the previous application or when the next beet cast trigger occurs, whichever one comes first. And so these applications should continue throughout the season until the weather conditions are no longer appropriate for the disease. And so that would probably be the middle of September or hopefully not, but possibly into October. And so when you're applying that last fungicide application, keep in mind your pre-harvest interval so you don't get into trouble with that. So there's some other techniques that you can use to increase the efficacy of your fungicides. And one of these is to have good leaf coverage of your sugar beets. So some things to keep in mind for that is that you want to have a good carrier volume for water, and also have appropriate pressure and a good nozzle that you use. So we recommend that you set your sprayers to have about 20 gallons per acre that you're applying and to have your pressure set at 100 PSI. Then for your nozzle type, Michigan Sugar has shown that the John Deere 360 nozzle is one of the best nozzles that you can use for Cercospora fungicides. Then we also recommend that you use an appropriate tested adjuvant. And the reason I'm emphasizing the tested part is because there are several different adjuvants that are available, but there's actually some that if you use them, they can decrease the efficacy of your fungicide. So we recommend that you only use the ones that have been tested by Michigan Sugar. And so they found that some of the best ones for use with this are Regard and Masterlock, although they have found several others that are acceptable. And so as a general reminder, you shouldn't ever tank mix a copper fungicide with glyphosate because you can get quite a bit of phytotoxicity and, in fact, even very severe leaf burn from that. So now very briefly, I want to give everyone an update as to the current status of Cercospora leaf spot here in Michigan. And so in several of our beet cast stations throughout the growing area, we currently have between 28 to about 38 DSVs. So it's definitely time to get that first application out there, particularly if you have older beets. So that would be beets from the 12-leaf stage and beyond. So also, at this point, we have not actually found any Cercospora leaf spot in the field to my knowledge, although it's definitely about time when we expect to start seeing those first lesions. So last year, I actually found the first lesions on June 17th, and the year before, I found the first ones on June 15th. Those are both in commercial grower fields. So as I said, it's definitely time to start with your first fungicide applications, especially if you have older beets in your field. And so in closing, I want to say that by using appropriate cultural practices, variety resistance, and a strong spray program, Cercospora leaf spot can successfully be managed. So I know last year we had a little bit lower pressure than what we've had in previous years, but this year we could have just as high of pressure or even higher than we ever have in the past. And so it's important to stick with your spray program. Be sure to get your fungicides applied on time, use effective fungicides, and do everything that you can to maximize the efficacy of your spray program. So with that, I want to thank everyone who's made our research possible, giving a special thank you to our grower collaborators. Then I also want to acknowledge the Michigan Sugar Beet Reach and all of the participants who make that program possible, including Michigan Sugar, Sugar Beet Advancement, Michigan State University, the University of Guelph, MSU Extension, and the USDA. And with that, I'll take any questions that you have at this time. Thank you.
Daniel, I do have one question, and it has to do with the resistance and the varieties that are coming onto the market. How long does it take for resistant varieties to be actually introduced as a commercial line? And are they expecting any yield drag with those new varieties that are coming online in 2021?
So oftentimes it can take several years for new varieties to come online. And so this work has actually been in the pipeline for a couple of years now. And they actually, compared to previous year, resistant varieties, They don't expect to see that much of a yield drag, although there is expected to be some, particularly when it comes to the sugar concentration. So they expect the tonnage to be fairly similar to other varieties, but the sugar concentration is probably going to be about like what 1399 has been historically. There will be some yield drag, but hopefully after a couple of years of breeding, they can get the yield to be on par with more susceptible varieties.
Who owns the new CLS resistant trait, and who has been licensed to sell the seed with the trait?
So currently it's KWS who owns the trait. So that's the parent company for Beta Seed and American Crystal. So those two are definitely going to be licensed to sell it. But I believe they were talking about selling the license to the other seed companies, so Hillshog and Seedex. But at this point, I don't know if they've done that or not. So we'll see how that plays out in the future.
Thanks, Daniel. If Chris is on, I would like Chris to comment. There's getting reports throughout the state of armyworm. Chris, what are you seeing or hearing?
I have a Fonz fax ready to go, but I didn't want to send it out until this breakfast just to hear if there was anything more. And I have some information in there about armyworm in corn and wheat and in soybeans as well. So long story short, all the corn calls I've had have all had a rye cover crop that was killed, and the egg laying had already occurred and they're moving on to the corn. And they can be pretty easily sprayed if you catch them in time, because that insecticide can go down into the whorl. I've seen them in wheat, but I haven't had an over threshold call in wheat. It wouldn't surprise me though. And then in soybeans, they just simply don't like soybeans. And I have a link in my Fonz fax to a Purdue, like a little film where they show starving armyworms. And this is soybeans planted into rye cover crop again. So those rye cover crops really set you up for armyworm. And then I also have a short note about Asiatic garden beetle. The damage is showing up now. It's about to pupate if it hasn't started already. So whatever damage is there in the southern Tira counties, it'll show up in that, not just stand loss, but very uneven stands. So if you're in that region or scouting fields there, I would think about Asiatic garden beetle if you're seeing those really uneven stands, and give me a call. I can't necessarily come out to the field, but I like to know those places, or maybe Bruce as well in Van Buren County. And then I do have some pictures of natural enemies in the Fonz fax that people are mistaking as something that they maybe should spray or that is of concern. I think more people are walking fields. They're getting out there. And so, these are the natural enemies in wheat that are going to move into soybeans later in the season. So I'm trying to prevent people from making bad spray decisions. So if you're not, if you don't get my email blast, I will put my email right into the chat box, and you simply email me your email and I add you to the list. And I don't, send out every week, just if something is important. And I don't sell the list to anybody. So I will put that in there right now so people can see my email.
Chris, this is Dennis Pennington.
Yeah, Dennis.
Question for you on wheat. The threshold, is that 2 caterpillars per square foot at the growth stage we're at now? Everything is headed out.
Yes, if it's headed out, that's what. Don't ask me where some of these thresholds come from. Sometimes they're inherited. In wheat, they might not be up on the plant, and even if they are, as you're walking through wheat, they tend to fall in front of you, like they're sneaky and they fall off. So you really do have to look at the ground and move the residue around. You might even see the big poop pellets there too, and then you'll see that feeding up on the flag leaf potentially. And you've walked a lot more fields than I have, and I have seen them there, but I haven't seen one over threshold yet.
Yeah, so another question I have, what about populations? Are we at the point where populations are going to level off, or could we see an explosion in population, or where are we at in the life cycle of armyworm?
So the ones the pictures that I've seen, most of them look to be around an inch. So there may be, I'm guessing they're not quite that last stage, like the hungry teenager stage, which is about 1.5 inches. Those are hard spray and harder to kill, and those are near to pupation. So these you have time to spray these before you get to the major damage. So I've only seen the pictures from this week, and I'd say they're about an inch long. So there may be fourth instar or something.
Okay.
So these are definitely, unless they're further ahead, they're definitely sprayable. The ones I saw early last week were like about half an inch, 3/4 of an inch, and they were maybe third instar was judging.
Yeah. So what I'm seeing in the field now is about 1.25 to 1.5 inches long. So those are going to be a little more difficult to control, right?
Well, they're closer to pupation, and if you look close, sometimes they have the white eggs laid on them, and those would be parasitoids that have already found them. So it's sort of a judgment call on how. I mean, it's hard for me to tell in pictures sometimes. So if they're too big and they look like they're starting to march or they're done, but I suspect that they're still sprayable now.
Yeah, and they are all over the state, and I've not heard of anything above threshold in wheat other than a field up by Ravenna.
Yeah, I'm getting calls from all over, but mostly in corn where we're having some more issues with the, and don't spray soybean typically because they're just going to starve. But corn and wheat, yes.
And in Ontario, they're putting out alerts big time. I guess they've got it in wheat bad over there, and they are way above threshold.
Well, and the thing is that most insects, they do most of their damage in their last 1 or 2 instars, and it's like there's nothing, and then overnight you go, what the heck happened here? And it's because the population has shifted now to that last instar, and that's when they probably eat, I don't know, I'm making this up, 80% of what they're going to consume, and it'll look like you just flipped the switch. And so those were there, they just were tiny and weren't apparent in their feeding.
So Chris, I'm still getting a few moths in my traps. How long will this last?
Well, I mean, they will be up here for the summer flying around to be another generation, but they typically aren't, they're not going to do anything. So we need to manage this generation now, and then we're okay. And then we move on to western bean cutworm and corn borer. And corn borers are emerging or have emerged. They're starting.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Any burning questions people have? I know we have some specialists on. See Aaron's on. Any questions and comments for the weed folks?
I'm here, and I guess I could just plug, Christy wrote an article about the dicamba labels and also alternatives if you do have some of those problematic weeds for control later in the season. So I'll put that in the chat box in case people miss that.
Thanks, Aaron.
We're starting to see some of these cornfields that were had lots of different colors going on start beginning to fix themselves too. So apparently it was more nutrients and it's grown into whatever it needed. That may have been some sulfur down here that got moved a little bit, but overall the color is improving. We've got, of course, our earlier planted corn in the Southwest is getting up there pretty good and looks really good actually. A lot of our April planted corn looks really good at this point.
I would concur with the color thing, Bruce. I know we had some sulfur issues up here, but I think a lot of those fields are kind of growing through. I think as it warms up, as they stretch those roots out a little bit, I think they're able to grab some of the nutrients they're looking for. So ours is this heat's really bringing things along.
Yeah, and some parts of the state did have a good combination of when those, pre or early post treatments were down and some weather implications. So I think, especially Bruce, I think you guys had kind of a good mixture of both some nutrient issues and then those plants were additionally stressed by some of those herbicide applications. So I went out 2 weeks ago now and took pictures of all of our pre-plots and put together a little video. So I'm trying to figure out how to close caption that, but that should be out to everyone shortly so you could see some of the corn research plots we had on campus and some of the pre-emergence herbicide injury that we did have. So stay tuned for that too.
So Dennis, is wheat beginning to turn up in mid-Michigan?
No, I haven't seen any wheat turning yet. When flowering happens, it's about 5 weeks from harvest at that point, and flowering started in the south probably right around the 1st of June or so. 1st through the 5th of June, say. So it's going to be, we're not going to be as late starting harvest this year as we were last year, but we're going to be probably more normal to maybe just a little bit behind normal by 4 or 5 days, I would say.
I'm going to have to send you some pictures then. We definitely have some color change going on down here. I'm not sure if it's all, and it's in some of it's in pockets. So I'll be looking a little bit further today.
Okay. Yeah. Once the wheat starts turning, you're looking at a couple of weeks for dry down to happen. Once you reach physiological maturity, which is when that peduncle turns yellow, that's when about 2 weeks, and then you're getting about dry down enough to start harvest.
So are you doing any early yield projections, Dennis?
Well, I think we certainly have had some pretty good yield potential up to this point. These 90-degree days we have in the forecast is going to kill us, and that will shut down. I'm hoping it doesn't trigger just the shutdown and conversion to senescence. We still got some more grain to fill and test weight to accumulate here. Yeah, once you get above about 82 degrees, the wheat plant really struggles a bit. So I think we've got pretty good yield potential. We'll have to see how bad these 90-degree days hit us. But our projected wheat yield for Michigan is 81 bushel per acre at this point. So we'll see what happens with the weather.
Thanks, Dennis. So anyone else have anything that they'd like to ask? Yeah.
Oh, I do have one question for Dennis Pennington. Dennis, how long can we still apply a fungicide to wheat and have it be effective?
You're talking like for head scab or
Yes.
for like foliar leaf? So now we're getting up upon the pre-harvest interval here, because most of these things have a 30-day pre-harvest requirement. So we're within 30 days, I think, of harvest or less than that. So if somebody was to try to make an application now, they would have to wait 30 days to do that, which is going to make them late on harvest, I think. So if the leaves are getting really covered with disease, they might be a little bit late anyway. So I think we're a little bit beyond our window for putting fungicide on at this point.
All right, that's what I wanted to know. I talked to a grower yesterday, and their wheat was not real early. It was a little bit late. And so I asked him when flowering occurred, and I said, you should normally be able to apply, 4 to 6 days after flowering at 50% of the field. Do you think we're well beyond that for all of the state?
Well, not for all of the state, because we have a plot up by Hillman, it's near Presque County, and that one just flowered here, a couple of days ago. And so in the northern part of the state, there still is opportunity to put some fungicide in, but anywhere from the thumb on south to the border to the state line, we're beyond that. So, with that 30-day pre-harvest interval, you get about 7 to 10 days after flowering, and you're about beyond your window. If you apply after that, you're going to have to hold your harvest later than what you maybe want to.
Thanks, Dennis.
And same if there's insecticides in there, be aware of the pre-harvest intervals for some of these insecticides too. They range from 7 days all the way up to almost 30 days. So that's another thing to think about.
Okay, any other questions? Well, enjoy your day and enjoy the rest of the week and the weekend, everyone, because Jeff gave us the nice weather to do that. So thanks for joining us today.